Why do we have total wars every 80, 90 years? One way to look at it is no one alive today was around during World War II.
There are these 80-year cycles where there's 4 different generations, and how they interact determines how the history plays out.
You have these millennials now. What happens to them? We grow up and ultimately we're the hero archetype, which historically means we're cannon fodder in the war. Now, what's different about this fourth turning is that we do have an escape valve, which is Bitcoin. Properly understood, Bitcoin is an institution owned by everyone and controlled by no one. What that means for the fourth turning is it actually reduces the risk. So if you have fewer people backed into a corner, you're gonna have fewer people lashing out and doing crazy things. And so we want as fast a Bitcoin adoption as possible.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Bitcoin News Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Wallace, and today I am very grateful to be joined by Brandon Quittem. Brandon was actually instrumental, partially, for my orange pill journey back in 2020 when the world was going crazy. I was looking for answers, and I saw his appearance on What Bitcoin Did, talking about the fourth turning. I picked up the book myself and had my eyes open. What we are seeing play out before us has been repeated before in history, and it will be repeated again. So let's dive right in. Brandon, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me, Rob. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, great. So let's dive into how you became sort of Bitcoin's resident expert in generational theory.
It's always funny to hear these little brands that get added in Bitcoin land. I was originally the Bitcoin mushroom guy, then I was the fourth turning generational cycle guy. We'll see what's next, but never planned for any of these little brands, but here we are. So like you in 2020, the world's going crazy. I'm living in Minneapolis, 2 miles away from where George Floyd was killed. And I'm watching the whole world go crazy, people stuck inside. I'm trying to make sense of the world. Whether or not we can ever make sense of the world properly, I have an instinct to try. And so I'm reading books like crazy, cooped up in my house, stumbled on the fourth turning as part of that exploration. And as far as I could tell, that was the best way to explain what was going on. And I was having problems with it because in my head, I'm pretty individualistic, kind of Bitcoiner by nature, pre-Bitcoin, like kind of do-it-yourself type attitude. And I thought most of America would not just do as we're told from the nanny state, doing things that don't really make sense. And I was sadly mistaken. You know, neighbors calling the cops on other neighbors for an extra car in the driveway on a Thanksgiving holiday, you know, getting yelled at in the co-op for not wearing a stupid mask on my face. Like I was, you know, pretty disheartened by the whole thing. And then the fourth turning theory came in and it started to give me some context for why people were acting in a way that I thought was crazy. And I think the TLDR there is that at the end of these long 80 plus year cycles, we collectively look around and we realize that our institutions are failing us. And it's getting so bad that we actually need to do something about it, and our institutions do matter. And so, like human nature, we wait to the last minute to fix something. The same is true at the society level. And I think the authors of this book sort of identified that. And so it's sort of a, if you're not with us, you're against us type mentality. It's a mentality where we collectivize and we're willing to give up great sacrifice in order to get through this hard time. You know, if we rewind throughout history, an example could be, hey, the barbarians are at the gate. I don't care if you're a 16-year-old kid, you got a spear in your hand, get up on the wall. Your whole world is at risk here, so it's time to fight. And historically, all these fourth turnings have ended in a hot war of some kind, either a total war like World War II, a civil war in America where it's all internal, or the Revolutionary War. Those are the last few fourth turnings. The Revolutionary War was kind of a hybrid between a hot war with an enemy and also internal. And so I predict a similar type consequence during the current fourth turning. We're towards the back third, let's say, of the existing one. If you're paying attention at all, you're starting to feel the world's getting a little crazy. And I think we're still accelerating towards some type of a crescendo. We can talk about what that could be. Not exactly clear at this point, but that's where we are today.
Yeah, so we are in the middle of a fourth turning. The book, well, it was written before our current fourth turning, but the author, Neil Howe, says that it started in 2008, 2009, the current turning that we're in now, right? So, but what this book is really talking about is the dance between generations, right? And that there are these 80-year cycles, 80 to 90 years, where there's 4 different generations, and how they interact determines how the history plays out. So before we get into the 4th turning, let's talk about the 4 generations that led up to now and how they play together.
Absolutely. Good tie-in. And yeah, that's the absolute base of the foundation. The authors wrote the book in 97, same year as The Sovereign Individual. Prior to that, I think early 90s, they wrote a book called Generations, which was a long-term study of American generational cohorts. And so the authors, Neil Howe and Bill Strauss, they are historians and demographers. Okay, they're just trying to study history, and out of that study, they identified this 80 to 90 year pattern. Then they later wrote a book specifically about that pattern in 97 called The 4th Turning, and then released an updated version a couple years prior. They did call around 2008 would be the next 4th Turning. They called that in 97, spot on. And so I give a lot of credence there. Very similar to the Sovereign Individual, which was similarly prophetic on a technological cycle. We can save that for another topic, but highly recommend that book if you haven't read it. Good companion to this. Okay, so the theory is 4 different archetypes: prophet, nomad, hero, artist, and they go in order. So each generation is an archetype. Let's say you're a prophet, your children will be nomads, their children will be hero, their children will be artists. Let's just say it goes like that. And then the author also identified 4 stages of life. So childhood, young adult, middle age, elder. Okay, and each of those 4 stages have predictable roles in society. The elders provide advice. Maybe they're the CEOs, presidents, leaders. The young people are obviously learning from their parents. They're sort of imprinted and molded by the point they were born. Young adults are out there, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. The middle-agers are like the managerial class, right? And so depending on which archetype is in which stage of life, you can have a predictable mood. And what that means is you can't necessarily predict the future, but you can predict that if a catalyst occurs at a certain stage in this cycle, you can predict how will the society respond. Are the idealistic, religious, fanatic boomers in charge? If so, we'll operate in a certain way. Are the pragmatic nomads in charge? We'll operate a certain way, right? And so that's the predictive quality. And then there's 4 stages in the 80 to 90 year cycle: 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th turning. They also have names. And at the end of that cycle, that's when stuff hits the fan and we sort of rebuild our exterior world. In the middle part of that cycle, we rebuild our interior world. So halfway point in all those cycles, you end up with a civil rights movement or a religious movement. Obviously, the civil rights movement, psychedelic 60s, that period is the most recent one. Previous ones would be like the Protestant Reformation, or going back to the 13 original colonies, the Quaker Rebellion, stuff like that. And what's weird is these things continue to repeat. You might say, hey, are we just mapping history and drawing convenient lines to support a theory? How is this possible? Why would humans follow patterns? Right? All fair questions. The authors go deep and they identified that primitive man also lived by the same cycle. And so it was called the saeculum. That's what he calls that 80 to 90 year cycle, which means a long human life. And so what's interesting here is, why do we have total wars every 80, 90 years? One way to look at it is no one alive today was around during World War II, essentially. So our collective knowledge as a species does not have the horrors of war front of mind. And so we drunkenly just fall right into war again because we don't have that trauma to know how bad it is to avoid it. And so I think that's part of what's going on here. Another one to really hammer home the underlying thesis. This is a ground up socio-human, techno-social kind of weird thing that humans create, but it's very emergent. And here's a simple example. Okay, I'm a millennial. I assume you're a millennial. We were all born during a certain period in time, okay? We all had parents born from a relatively similar generation. Okay, we're all born in the same context. The world we swim in is the same, so we're all kind of parented the same. We have the same cultural moments that we, like 08, 2001. Parents lost their house in 08. Now we all went through COVID, right? So we all go through a similar upbringing, and then typically what kids do is they rebel against their parents. So what you'll see is kids are often the opposite archetype of their parents, just due to human nature. I think it's a good thing. It's kind of like biology saying, hey, we got to change it up every so often in order to have a diverse set of viewpoints so that if things get bad, some version of the group knows how to navigate it. That's how I see it. Anyways, we're all stamped with the generation that we're shaped with the history that we're given. And then we leave the nest, we leave our parents, and we go to college, university, or leave home. Now we're all on our own. That age, let's say 16 to 25-ish, we start to leave the nest, and we immerse ourselves with our peers. And as soon as that period's done, we've essentially stamped our hopes, fears, dreams, how we react as a cohort is now defined and essentially permanent for the rest of our life. Then we grow up. Now we're middle-aged, we have kids, and guess what? Our generation responds relatively similar throughout the rest. And so we predictably go and imprint ourselves on history, then history affects generations, generations affect history, and it's a cycle like that to infinity. And if we want to go through the existing generations, that might be helpful here. So the boomers, they are the prophet archetype. Okay, that means that they came of age during the last midpoint, which is the psychedelic 60s civil rights era. So essentially the hippies, who were very idealistic, they were raised, or they were born, during the last first turning. So after World War II, everything's boring. So kids grow up in Leave It to Beaver, white picket fence, no culture. And what do? Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. They push back. Then the hippies turn into parents and they have kids. Guess what? They don't really want a parent. So the kids become these Gen X latchkey kids, the nomads. They're the bad boys. They're underparented. Okay? Then they grow up to be pragmatic managerial class. They're like the generals who do the hard things in war. Okay, then you have this reactionary force when they have kids, which could be either from the boomers or the Gen X. But you have these millennials now. What happens to them? They're the collectivists. They're overparented. We react to these bad boys. And then you have, baby on board, DARE program, 7th place ribbons, everyone's a snowflake. Okay, that's the millennial group. We grow up and ultimately we're the heroes, hero archetype, which historically means we're cannon fodder in the war. So during World War II, the hero generation was young people fighting. And again, the previous prophet archetype was driving the ship. They're the ideologues, do as I say, not as I do. And then the final one is the artist. That's Gen Z. They're born during the crisis, during the fourth turning, and that imprints on them heavily. So they turn inward. They're low ambition, they're quiet, they're scared. All they know is chaos, so it dramatically affects them. The previous generation, we call them Gen Z now, the previous one was the lost generation. They just didn't really show up, didn't really do much. And I think people today would think the same about Gen Z. Now, I'm curious, and I haven't explored this thought much, but I'm curious how technology will play a role in that generation, because prior, we don't have connectivity online, and so if you're isolated at home, you become a weird inside kid, right, in the 40s, 30s, 40s. Now, what do? They're on the internet, they're zero social skills, which is same as the previous one, but they do have this weird internet world where they become native there rather than in real life. Curious how that will play. Let's see, those are the archetypes. Very quickly, the last fourth turning was 1929 to 1945. Started with the stock market collapse, Great Depression, and then during that period, what happens is things get bad and we do unprecedented reactions to those negative catalysts, and we try to get out of this crisis. So we had deficit spending for the first time. Hey, the banks aren't safe. Let's create FDIC insurance. Don't worry, everyone, your banks are safe. Oh, you lost your job. Don't worry. Here's unemployment insurance. Here's Social Security, right? So we created all these massive institutional change in order to address the recent crisis. Obviously, that turned into World War II. And on the backs of World War II, we re-architected the entire world. The game board gets tossed. Pieces get rearranged. Then we have Bretton Woods, so a new monetary system. We have the World Bank and IMF in order to rebuild. Central bank of central banks, NATO, what else? A bunch of things all came out of that. So the world we know is essentially architected during a crazy period of time at the last minute without any planning on the heels of World War II. And now all that world that we constructed there, let's be charitable and say, our monetary system, World Bank, IMF, NATO, let's say all those things were good at the time. Well, due to inertia or nature or I don't know what, those institutions slowly decayed and or the world changed around them. So those institutions are not fit to serve us now. And we go forward a little bit after the peacetime after the war. We're just chill. No one's worried about anything. We're sick of fighting. Then we had the psychedelic crisis, Civil War era, etc. Then we have the unraveling, stage 3. Okay, let's deregulate. Things are getting bad, crime's going up. However, we still have enough economic momentum where people's day-to-day lives are still relatively okay. So even though the world's burning and we're making it worse, we don't really feel the pain yet. Transition to the fourth turning, 2008. Obviously GFC, things get crazy. And then we transition into a very different world that we've been living in since then. One interesting point, because politics are so relevant now, every fourth turning becomes hyper political because the stakes are high. And so everything's political now, and our politicians are aware of this. And so an interesting transition point between the third turning unraveling and the fourth turning crisis is that in the 90s, early 2000s, if things were bad out there, politicians would minimize the bad and say, don't worry, I'll keep the gravy train going. Those bad things, no big deal. Fast forward to Obama and forward, what do we have? Hope and change, make America great again, right? So politicians are leaning into, hey, everything's horrible and I'm your savior. Mm-hmm. So it's an inverse between those two, sort of defines that era. And yeah, I would say between maybe by 2033, I would say this fourth turning will be done. Maybe a little earlier, but plus or minus a few years from 2030 is what I'm expecting. I think we're still ramping up. Yeah, that's probably good for the high level overview. Let me know if I miss anything there.
Yeah, that was great. I think the easiest way for people who aren't historically inclined per se to understand the fourth turning is just through the crises, right? I mean, what we're going through right now, World War II, Civil War, Revolutionary War, those things defined this country. Those presidents, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, FDR, and I guess Trump now sort of define those eras and have set the path forward for the next 80 years after that, right? So as you said, us millennials, we are the hero generation. We are supposed to be the soldiers for this great conflict of whatever happens next. But it also says in the book that during the fourth turning, people are yearning for centralization, for normalcy, for institutions to become powerful again. Let's talk about us as millennials and as Bitcoiners, who are sort of a bit different than the average millennial per se. But how do you look at our generation? Do you see us as just order followers? Do you think that we just want to get along? Or do you think that we are just sort of rebels and Bitcoiners and people who see a new way forward?
Great question. So yeah, we are the warriors. Although without an actual war to focus on, I would call us political keyboard warriors, right? We pick up the environmental flag, we pick up the economic inequality flag, we pick up all these different causes, and we just become keyboard warriors. I hope we stay keyboard warriors because I don't want any hot wars that I have to deal with. But I do think we're going to go down that direction. In terms of collectivism, yes, we are. No matter what we want to believe as Bitcoiners, our generation is extremely collectivist. And there's positives to that, right? We're team players. We're good in organizations, in a work setting. We know how to work with other people. We value the mission. We really want to have meaning behind our work, which older generations, especially Gen Xers, the pragmatic group, do not understand. They're like, I get paid, I go home, compartmentalize. What are you guys whining about? You don't need a purpose. Like, get it from your family, right? So there's a little disconnect there. On the collectivist side, should we expect this? Is this normal? And the answer is yes. So all previous fourth turnings, we flirt with whatever popular ideology of the day leans collectivist. So if you go look in the 30s, the intelligentsia class, they all were socialist, communist. That's just how it was. Hey, maybe this capitalism thing's not working so good. Maybe we should try something else. And unironically, hammer and sickle is everywhere right now with young people. It's a pretty cool logo. I think capitalism needs a rebrand, maybe a cooler logo. But obviously these are bad ideas. And I feel this firsthand because pre-Bitcoin, I was making phone calls for Bernie Sanders. I correctly identified a problem that the economic system's not working, but I incorrectly assumed that some version of capitalism was the problem. And I think most young people today feel that, and they make the wrong decision that we need capitalism, rather than, hey, wait a minute, the monetary system is the problem that produces the outcomes which you then define as capitalism. Obviously not the case, but we're in it now. We're on a knife's edge between going into some sort of a techno-fascist state, techno-socialist state, if you want. Like, let's just let AI run everything. Let's let the government become massive. The government will know best. Let's keep making it bigger. Everyone leeches off the government. It's already a large percentage. And so we have that force strongly going in. We also have, I would say, kind of centered around Bitcoin. Balaji has a lot of things around like the orange flag or the orange party. And I think that's the right way to look at it. I think if we want to define it, it would be something like free markets, which includes a free market for money. And so I do hope we have a Bitcoin-based financial system in the future. Maybe not for everyone, but for those who want to lean into markets, I think that's a side I'm cheering for. I think that side is gaining a lot of power, but young people today don't see it. It's legitimately hard to understand. I don't think they'll ever get it en masse. And so, we're flirting with both right now, and I really hope we don't decide to become a socialist techno state, because I think that erodes all. In the short term, it erodes all civil liberties. In the long term, it erodes our economic capacity, our quality of life, our ability to defend ourselves. And I don't want to be a part of that future.
I wanted to briefly interrupt today's interview to give a big shout out to our lead sponsor, Rhino Bitcoin. Rhino is the all-in-one Bitcoin super app built by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners. Buy or sell instantly. Send sats anywhere on the Lightning Network. Withdraw straight to cold storage. Even turn sats into gift cards or link to a Casa multisig, all within one sleek interface. And Rhino is just warming up. Soon, you'll pay bills, borrow against your Bitcoin, and save for retirement, all without leaving the app. Download Rhino at rhinobitcoin.com or tap the link in the description below. Use promo code Bitcoin News and Rhino will drop you $10 of free Bitcoin into your account today. Secure your stack with Rhino Bitcoin and enjoy the rest of the video. And every civilization needs a foundational myth, and World War II has always been ours, right? I mean, growing up, we had video games. Who could you kill in video games? You could kill zombies and Nazis. Those are the two people who were acceptable to kill on a video game, right? And so we've had this idea that bad guys, fascism, that was in the past. We must do everything to never have that happen again, right? And so we've been sold this, some call it blue pill narrative, some call it soft Marxism, right? The idea that everybody's equal, that there is no difference between men and women. And that grew. I mean, of course, the hippies, the boomers, who are the foundation of this seculum, they were the ones to really institute that, as they were rebelling against the white picket fences of the 50s. But That's been going on since the 60s up until now. And I feel like us millennials, we were the last generation really to be sold that bill of goods and to take it, right? To think that going to college was the right thing. If you just played by the rules, you would make it in life. But now that whole entire World War II narrative, whether it be about equality and progressivism or play by the rules and you'll get ahead, all of it is coming crumbling down. And Gen Z, I think, is dealing with it in a rough way, right? I mean, they're the fourth turning babies. They've got to, that's their role in history. But let's talk about the World War II narrative, progressivism, how you've seen it in your own life and how it's eroding before our very eyes.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing to underline, we touched on it earlier, is that the founding myth created a very long time ago. Very few people were around when that was founded. And I think you did correctly identify millennials were the last ones who absolutely bought into the narrative. And then maybe sometime in the last 5-10 years, the cracks started to show. And increasingly, the millennials are being disenfranchised by that narrative. Social Security's gone. The 60-40 portfolio is dead. You can't just like work hard and stop eating avocado toast and make coffee at home and afford a house. That's just not happening for us. And yeah, the Gen Z kids, I will say, it seems like, I don't have much experience with this generation, but it seems like they are not buying the narrative at all, and they're forging a new path. And you see more questioning of progressive politics. You see, especially young males, feeling extremely disenfranchised, and I think rightfully so. You see more entrepreneurship out of that group than the millennials. And so, yeah, they're starting to see the counter force to the old regime taking hold. I think that in terms of progressivism, I think conservatism and progressivism are evergreen concepts that exist in every single scale. In my household, in my business, in my school, in my state, in my country, in the world, right? The instinct to conserve is like, hey, let me do it the other way. The instinct for progressivism is, hey, I'm a young person. I've got new ideas. My role in society is to attempt to change things. And I'm young and I'm energy idealistic. Before I'm jaded, I just go guns blazing trying to change the world. That's common for young people. Then you get older, you get jaded, and you get a little more conservative as time goes on. And the conservative side of any size group, their role is to say, hey, wait a minute. These institutions are here for a reason. Maybe, just maybe, you don't understand the full context of the changes you want to bring, and you don't understand the unintended consequences that it would bring. Right? So that natural tension exists. It's a good thing. What I would say, modern politics, we would say like the progressive wing of the Democrats. That's sort of taken center stage over the last, call it 15 years. Seems to be peaked maybe sometime during COVID lockdowns, I would say. It's been going down since, that's my guess. And I think the progressive idealism, maybe we could call it, I think that's a fine, nice to believe point of view in peacetime. When things are great and your day-to-day needs are met, your Maslow hierarchy of needs is looking pretty good, yeah, you can progress up that and pick on the next most important social issue from the safety of your home. And so things like, hey, let's shut down nuclear plants and thermal sources like oil, gas, coal, that's nice to say in a world where there's no real consequences. However, look at Germany. They shut down coal plants, they shut down nuclear plants, and they're like, oh yeah, we're green, la la la. And then guess what happens? Well, their whole country blows up. All 300 to 400-year-old industrial companies who survived anything over that period of time are shutting down now because they can't afford to operate due to the cost of energy. And so that's a pretty big sign to say that, I know I'm picking on the green energy stuff. It's a pet issue for me, but there's other examples. Anyways, when the rubber meets the road, you absolutely have to face physical reality, and you have to face the reality of scarcity and the cost of energy. And so I think progressivism dies because of real world consequences. If you can't heat your home, you can't afford food, you can't build things, cost of living goes up too much. And a large part of that is due to energy prices. Energy prices are upstream of everything. So if energy prices go up, everything you do, buy, eat, doesn't matter, all costs more. And so what we're seeing now is a little bit more economic realism or political realism, you might say, where it's like, yeah, those are nice to have, but when I have to put food on the table, all of a sudden my priorities shift a little bit. And so I think that stuff starts to go away as economic conditions erode under the population that we're discussing. Also, these are very much a U.S. based movement. Anywhere around the world where economic conditions are harder, they don't have the luxury belief that we can just pretend there's no difference between biological males and women, or we pretend everyone's the same, blah, blah. Those are obviously fantasies, and they feel good. But yeah, when the pain starts to come out, those ideas disappear very quickly.
And it's this pendulum, right? How it swings between generation to generation, and one is reacting, rebelling against the one before it. And it's funny to think over the last 80 years, every generation, every 10 years was extremely different, right? From the 50s, 60s, 70s, the fashion, the music, the movies, everything had its own distinct flavor. But then once we hit that fourth turning, that 2008, 2009, everything stagnates, right? You watch an episode of The Office from 2005, you don't know if it's from 2005, 2015, or 2020 or 2025, right? I mean, the fashion's the same, the haircuts are the same, the music has not changed in over 15, 20 years, really, right? I mean, there's of course small subgenres and whatnot, but the overall mainstream culture seems to be stuck in place and is ready to be tossed up. And so, and we see that now. The progressive narrative got so overburdensome to the young that they are rebelling in the opposite direction. So now these kids who are in high school, who are 15 years old, they like Andrew Tate. They're not following Greta Thunberg. They want to be alpha males, right? And you look at all the slang from these days, whether it's Chad or Rizzler, alpha, beta, all these things are about sort of real social sexual dynamics compared to the morality dynamics and want to feel goods of us millennials, right? It's funny. Do you have any a take on that, especially the cultural stagnation? Do you think that that's a natural part of the fourth turning?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I completely agree. It does feel like culture has stagnated. I haven't thought about it deeply through the fourth turning lens, but my initial reaction is that, yeah, we're all uncertain about the future. And if we're uncertain about the future and we don't feel this growth, this change, this upward mobility, which has been happening for the last 50 years relatively consistently, what do? We waffle around. We go back to baseline. We get kind of stuck. We get anxious. We go online. We yell. We fight about political cause. All political causes are equally as painful, even if it's from a country you can't point your finger on a map. We're all just reactionary and all tense. And so I don't know. I'm trying to think, in the 30s and 40s, was that the case? Maybe so. If your economic conditions are deteriorating, you don't invest as much in new, nice to have cultural trends, and instead you worry about putting food on the table and or being a keyboard warrior. Because you feel like something's off. So you got to go external to the world and try to save the world, rather than have fun in the cultural trends of the moment. There's just very little dynamism.
Yeah, it's the fight to stay alive, right? To preserve oneself, and in the desire to preserve oneself, you need to make sure that you have enough resources to do so. So in the fourth turning, money gets very weird, right? In the Revolutionary War, they printed a bunch of Continentals, paper money. In the Civil War, they printed a bunch of greenbacks, paper money, fiat. And then in the last one, of course, they confiscated the gold under FDR, and we are under this new dollar global reserve currency system. So I've heard you say in a prior podcast that fiat money is a very fourth turning phenomenon, and as well as financial repression, right? I mean, they are going to tax you and steal your value through inflation. So let's talk about what happens to money in fourth turnings.
Yeah, great point. One more meta trend to tie it all together. So fourth turning theory, generational theories, bottom up, emergent through the people and the archetypes in the social layer. You have Ray Dalio's theory that the long-term debt cycle occurs. That's a top-down, hey, the debt's getting too high, what do we do about it thing. Those seem to map pretty well. And then what you're talking about, it's right in the middle, which is that money goes soft in every fourth turning, meaning we go from a somewhat harder money to something that's easier to create new units out of thin air. Why do we do that? Well, we need to solve problems, so the politicians print new money to try to bail ourselves out. Maybe it's just creating paper money. Maybe it's forced bail-ins, which is what I would call the 1933 executive order making gold illegal. You essentially force the population to collectively feel the pain, right? So you lock everyone in. And right now we're going through the same thing. The COVID money printing printed like 30-40% of all the outstanding dollars, 100-year-old currency, and in 3 years we produced, let's just say, 40% more units. Obviously that creates a lot of inflationary pressure and people don't like it. Now what's different about this fourth turning is that we do have an escape valve, which is Bitcoin. And I did think that they were going to try to shut this escape hatch and force everyone to be locked in. And to my surprise, the current administration here and in many places around the world are embracing Bitcoin. And I don't know if that's just individuals in the government who are self-serving, they see an opportunity. I don't know if they fully grasp that that actually defangs one of the largest sources of power for governments, which is the money printer. But we are going down that path now. And I do think that individuals or organizations, companies, state, whatever, whoever adopts Bitcoin during this period will benefit unfairly compared to those who do not. I shouldn't say unfairly, disproportionately to those who do not adopt Bitcoin. And so I do think that's one major change in this period. And the net of that is money printing won't be as effective because inflation will go even faster because fewer people are locked into the dollar system, meaning more people are getting their money into Bitcoin. And every time they turn on the money printers, obviously I work for Swan, a Bitcoin exchange. We serve all different types of clients. And I've been there 5.5 years. I've seen all these things change over time. And when we started the company in 2019, 2020, I would say 25 to 40 was like our 90% of our clients. Then during 2020, 21, 22, during the COVID money printing, we saw a massive influx of boomers. Okay, they're starting to be worried about their retirement, right? Going back to economic realism, they're seeing their retirement be questioned. They're seeing inflation go up, and they're saying, hey, maybe my future is not secure. What do? They go look for a solution. They find Bitcoin. They buy in large volume. And so, yeah, every time the printer goes on, more people find Bitcoin. More people finding Bitcoin makes the money printer less effective. So that positive feedback loop is going to make the inflationary pressures accelerate. And I expect that going forward, as Lynn Alden would say, nothing stops this train, meaning doesn't matter what political party you are, doesn't matter what your ambitions are. The debt burden requires new money to sustain itself. We're already, okay, macro for a second, U.S. government budget, we're spending the same on interest on our debt as we are for defense. So defense is like the third biggest line item, and on par with that now is simply interest on the debt. Not paying off the debt, the interest on the debt. So this is a very scary place, and I expect increasing money printing, and there's no way around it. And so if you're listening to this, you better own some Bitcoin and be mindful over the next decade because things are going to get weird.
They already are weird, right? Seeing it how it's been played out over the last 5 years, we have never seen greater inequality, right? And I think that's a common theme from a third turning perspective, right? Where that's the unraveling. People are going to be very much more self-interested, got to get theirs. And we saw that in the go-go 90s. And then now we're in this fourth turning where the inequality is really, it's hard to comprehend, and it's hard to keep a society get together when it's that bad. But it's through inflation and taxation that this sort of gets evened out, right? The bondholders are going to pay by the the money that they receive back being worth less, and those who make a lot of money are going to be taxed to the hilt. I mean, during World War II, there was a 90% top tax rate, right? I mean, that would drive people absolutely insane today. So what are some ways that people can counteract this? Of course, there's Bitcoin, right? But financial strategies for a fourth turning on an individual level, what would you say?
Yeah, you nailed it big right there, which is that during this period, I think Lynn Alden calls it economic repression. And so we need roughly a decade of real interest rates being lower than inflation, which means if you hold bonds, historically there's some amount of inflation, and historically the bonds pay you some interest rate that roughly keeps up with inflation. Now we're going to have inflation significantly higher than interest on bonds, and we need that for like a decade. And so the net of that is bondholders and dollar holders get devalued dramatically over the next decade. Asset holders, let's say equity holders, best case scenario flat. Hard asset holders outperform. And so when you're thinking about your portfolio in a world, let's say 20 years ago, from like the 70s until let's say 2008, maybe even 2015, the 60-40 portfolio was the correct approach. 60% equities, 40% bonds. In that period, bond rates, interest rates on bonds were going down more or less linear for 50 years straight. And in that condition, you can expect the 60 portfolio to perform well. Now we're in a world where the 40 on that portfolio bonds are guaranteed losers, and the equity positions are historically overvalued. Probably most companies in the S&P 500 are destroying capital every year. They can't keep up with inflation. They're not growing fast enough. And so equity outlook is a little bit scary, especially in the West. You can make an argument for a rotation to emerging markets, but that's going to be really hard to trade. So as a normal person, I would look at your retirement account, I would look at your investments, and I would do some rebalancing, focus heavily on hard assets, Bitcoin being number one, gold being a relatively sound asset. I don't hold much gold, but I don't think it's a bad idea to hold some gold. I would just make sure you have Bitcoin, because Bitcoin will outperform better than gold over the long term. I don't see any reason to believe otherwise. Sell all your bonds, hold as little dollars as possible. Caveat being you need dollars for short-term unintended events. So keep an emergency fund of some kind, 2 months, maybe a year, depending on your circumstances. The rest should go into hard assets. I would view real estate not as an investment. It never was an investment, to be clear. We allowed housing to be monetized. Most people's retirement savings, quote unquote, is in home equity. I think housing's in a little bit of a scary place. One, because Bitcoin's going to demonetize real estate marginally over time. It's also going to demonetize any other asset like the Mag 7 because Bitcoin's just a better store of value asset. And without a strong store of value asset like Bitcoin, people will overbuy homes, overbuy equities as an attempt to store value. And so I expect both of those two to create downward pressure on those assets. I'm not saying we're going to have a housing crash, although we might. The other thing is demographics are against us in housing. So if population continues to grow and grow and grow, that's more pressure on home prices. However, we've already peaked population in the US, starting to roll over. And in that type of world, essentially there's a giant boomer generation and the younger generations aren't big enough. And so if the young generations are bigger than the old generations, no problem. Young generation pays into the pot. The smaller elder generation draws out. Right now we're inverse. That's not a good thing for home prices. And so if I may, fine, own your primary home, there's reasons to do that. But I think as an investor, you don't want investments in real estate. The cost to maintain those is going up. The projected earnings going down. That's not a good recipe. Boomers are going to retire, sell their second home. Who's buying that, etc. You add all that up, rotate out of real estate investments into hard assets. I recommend that as soon as possible. One last point on demographics, just so I don't overstate it. America has relatively good demographics relative to the rest of the world. China's way worse. Korea's way worse. Japan's way worse. You can look at places in Africa, some in South America that have better demographics than the U.S., but we're okay. We need to start having babies, but we're not in like catastrophe mode just yet, although we could get there. So TLDR, don't blow up. Hold as much Bitcoin as you can, but don't be a forced seller of your Bitcoin. Don't trade your Bitcoin. Don't take out leverage. Don't try and get a yield. Keep it. And also don't overinvest in Bitcoin. What does that mean? Sounds crazy from a Bitcoin bull who's like, pretty much my whole net worth is in Bitcoin or Swan equity, some other things, but that's like 90%. So the point is, though, you don't want to be in a situation where Bitcoin price goes down and you need to raise funds to live, and then you sell the bottom. So make sure you have enough buffer to hold your Bitcoin for 10 years or longer. And if you do that, you will be, as far as I can tell, rewarded for that effort.
Very well said. Thank you for that mini class right there. In terms of holding hard assets and bearer assets, gold and Bitcoin, there's always the fear that the government can go a little wild during these fourth turnings, right? Last time we saw 6102, FDR told everybody they got to hand over their gold or pay a lot of money or go to jail. Do you think that something like that could happen again in America?
I'll do this two parts. One, maybe 3 years ago, 5 years ago, I think the biggest risk to Bitcoin and the biggest barrier to entry was that people would say the government's going to shut it down, right? If Bitcoin is what you say and it gets big enough, the government will just stop it because it hurts the government. Okay, fine. I agree with that critique that was a large risk. And the last 3 years, we saw the opposite happen. And so I think the risk of the U.S. government trying to kill Bitcoin or stop it outright is over. No one's trying to do that. In fact, they're adopting it and they're racing to adopt it. So I think outright bans out the window. I think there's a different kind of risk that we're entering now, which is more like defanging Bitcoin, ghettoizing Bitcoin, putting Bitcoin on the Native American reservation, whatever analogy you want to use. And so what I expect is privacy under attack and self-custody under attack. Those are the two remaining vectors. I think the government, if they could wave a magic wand, they would say everyone holds the ETF with Wall Street custodians. Luckily, over 50% of the Bitcoin supply is still held by individuals, primarily in self-custody. And so we want to be very mindful of allowing the state, we don't want to give the state a honeypot, like, hey, MicroStrategy, you're nationalized. Hey, miners, you're nationalized. Hey, Coinbase, you're nationalized. I think that risk exists. Doesn't kill Bitcoin, but it would essentially lay the groundwork for some kind of soft repression on the asset and take away the cypherpunk values part of Bitcoin. It's a real risk. It's a real concern. We should take it very seriously. I will say, just on a self-custody basis, Bitcoiners, ideological Bitcoiners are saying things like, hey, it's not good that we have ETFs. It's not good that we have MicroStrategy, etc. We need everyone in self-custody. And I think that that's comes from a good place, but it's wrong. I think the best we can hope for is 51% of the outstanding units held in self-custody and maybe 5% of individuals in self-custody at maturity. And the reason is people don't like to do hard things, and people will be lazy and they'll outsource their trust. I don't think private key management is that hard. If you can drive a car safely, you can do self-custody, but individuals will take the easy way out, generally speaking. And so I'm hoping for 5% self-custody and 60% units in self-custody. And if we get to that type of state at maturity, I think that's plenty to minimize the risk of a honeypot attack. Because if the government goes after 40% of the supply, okay, fine, you're not stopping Bitcoin. Most of the units are not locked in. And so what we're looking for to avoid this trend is more geographic diversity. Right now, the US is taking a clear leader position in hash rate and holdings and equity companies, holding Bitcoin, working in Bitcoin, which is good for the next century of America, but risky from a Bitcoin standpoint. So we actually want a diverse list of countries competing, maybe frenemies, maybe actually competition, but we don't want to geocentralize this thing anymore. Let's see. Yeah, that's my thought.
Yeah, it is a real risk that it becomes centralized. And Michael Saylor's got 580,000 Bitcoin hanging out over at Coinbase and Fidelity. And if the financial situation in this country gets even worse, they're going to look for even more drastic measures to take, right? Speaking of drastic measures, fourth turnings don't end without a bang. And whether this is external conflict or internal conflict, they usually end in some kind of kinetic action, right? And so I was listening to a podcast with Neil Howe earlier, and he was saying that right before World War II, up until 1939, Americans would have been convinced that the conflict of their era would have been internal, right? I mean, there was lots of communists and fascists, Lindbergh and New York versus each other. And so you have the situation where you don't know what the final conflict is going to be, but there is some sort of blow off top here. So whether it's Republicans versus Democrats, red states versus blue states, or is it America versus China, it's hard to tell what could be that kinetic movement, but what would you put the probability being on, external or internal?
Great question. So to paraphrase Neil Howe, all total wars were in fourth turnings, and all fourth turnings have had a total war. Does that mean we're guaranteed to have a total war in the next 5 to 7 years? No. What it means is we need a catalyst large enough to mobilize the people in order to make a massive change. Historically, it's been war. I hope it doesn't need to get there, but I think the odds are in that camp, as in we will have a civil war or a total war. Now, is it us versus China? Is it U.S. Civil War? I don't know. I would say during COVID, I'll give you my thinking, which has changed over the years. When I wrote the original essay in 2020, I thought, hey, maybe COVID is the thing that we can rally against and we'll come together to solve this thing. Boy, was I wrong. I think it created a generational trauma, generational strife between left and right, destroyed families, social groups don't intermingle. I saw a stat recently. Actually, I'll ask you, what percentage of marriages today are between a Democrat and a Republican?
Yeah, it's definitely under 10%.
Yeah, 4%. Insane, right? I see this in my own life, like social groups fracture, we use different language, the same news story comes out, both sides have an entirely different true story around it. And so I see that as a huge risk for America. What it does is it makes America vulnerable. And what that means is, let's say the U.S. starts continue to fracture. Now all of a sudden we have to focus energy internally. We're distracted abroad. We don't have as much resources abroad. Economic conditions get worse. Cities burn, whatever it looks like. And if that starts to happen, I could see a world where our adversary nations see us distracted and then they take actions abroad to escalate. And so I think that's the prime. If I had to place one bet, that would be my highest confidence odds. Deteriorates here, opportunistic war starts abroad. That's one path. Another path is that MAGA, whatever we're calling the new version of the Republican Party, loose coalition around MAGA, which is not Tea Party Republicans. This is not neocon Republicans. This is something new. If we're optimistic, it allows the country to come together in a way that we haven't seen for a while on the backs of economic improvements. TBD if we're going to get there. It's only been, 6 months in Trump's term. It's been a wild ride. I don't know how that's going to go. He's dealt a bad hand and he's attempting to make a large change. And I think that's going to come with a lot of costs and a lot of pain. And so if we're being charitable here, there's a world where we improve economic conditions, we come together and it goes well. I think there's a world where, nothing stops this train. Trump tries to stop the train and it just deteriorates and no one could have stopped it. And in that world, Trump will be blamed for it. Midterms will be a disaster and will slide closer to war. I don't know where it lands now. It seems week to week my mind flips on which is more likely. I expect that to continue, so I have very little confidence in either path. A third path that I think is extremely likely is some sort of a Cold War with China. I think it's already happening. I don't think the average person admits it. I think our military intelligence communities would say that is happening right now. which is a war type condition where it's economic, it's tariffs, it's trade, it's hacking a energy grid, it's drones disrupting a supply chain, it's stuff like that, where there's an element of plausible deniability. It's not soldiers on the battlefield. It's like deception, PR games, stuff like that to try and influence the world around you without being pinned for it. And so I think that's the conditions we're in now. I expect that to accelerate. I don't know if that stumbles into a hot war, one side overreacts. I think the Middle East is pretty sketchy right now, a lot of risk there. Russia, Ukraine, obviously very risky. I don't know what's going to happen. I think best case scenario, we have a multipolar world and we sort of fracture and we carve out part of it for the East, we carve out part of it for the West. We re-industrialize the strategically significant industries either in the US or with our near partners, while China does the same. And we sort of coast out of our like economic relationship that we're in now. Make no mistake, China needs us. We need China. Those things are starting to break down. And so hopefully we can slowly break up with China and not let it get crazy. But I think the risks are high. And I think more than the risks are high, I think the appetite is high for total war. Going back to the fourth turning, if you had the same catalyst in a third turning versus the same catalyst in a fourth turning, the reaction to those things are drastically different. Example, in the third turning, the Germans sunk our Lusitania, I think it's called, one of our ships. We didn't really care. Big deal, no problem. That was in the third turning. No appetite for total war. Pearl Harbor, the next day, total war, everyone's on board, right? Maybe Pearl Harbor is a little worse, but let's call them at least same tier of catalyst, very different reactions. And so it doesn't take much in a fourth turning to blow the whole thing up.
Yeah, it's you feel it in the air, right? Something's sort of gotta give here. And I mean, we just saw Trump and Elon go at it yesterday, right? I mean, two of the world's most well-known men just airing out their dirty laundry for everyone to see. It's conflict is rife because times are sort of hard, right? The money's broken and we've got to figure out a new way forward. And so after a fourth turning, there is a high, the first turning, and you have the ability to write history anew, create new institutions. Last time we saw the UN, the IMF, NATO, things that defined, of course, the next 80, 90 years. What kind of institutions and lifestyle do you see in a first turning coming out of this?
Absolutely. So I think what do we need? We need stability and we need order, which is a proxy for institutions. Those are the primary forms of order and stability in a society. So that's what we need that's what we need. And we also have a debt problem. Okay, those are the two largest forces pushing us here. I obviously see the world through orange tinted glasses, so I'm going to inject Bitcoin here. I do think Bitcoin is the answer, or the largest potential answer to these two problems. I think properly understood, Bitcoin is a new type of institution. It's an institution owned by everyone and controlled by no one. That's very important. That satisfies all political flavors, all the political needs that each party may have, all can be found in Bitcoin. The left wants equality, and they get that. The right wants, hey, if I take risk and I earn my money, I get paid for it, and no one can stop me. So both are satisfied there. It also has a type of stability that's opposite of the fiat system. The fiat system has short-term stability in price, meaning if things are going crazy in the world, the government can just print new money in order to minimize the pain in the short term. Okay, that's what they've done forever. In the short term, good. Long term, higher inflation, and it increases the risk of systemic failure. 08, 2020, 1929, many examples. Bitcoin system's the complete opposite. Short-term price is extremely volatile. There's nothing you can do to adjust the Bitcoin supply to react to the environment. It's fixed. However, what that means is if there's crisis, the short-term pain is greater, but the systemic risk never changes. And so in a period where we have systemic risk, we're going to be seeking something that has less systemic risk and will be willing to accept short-term volatility in exchange for long-term stability. And I think Bitcoin satisfies that. And it provides order in a way that our current system cannot. And so anyone, anywhere in the world can adopt this thing. Smartphone, doesn't matter where you are, you don't need an ID, jump on board. And I think it serves as a pressure release valve on the economic conditions as we go into this new chaos period. And I think that what that means for the fourth turning is it actually reduces the risk in many different ways because individuals can save themselves. So if you have fewer people, countries, organizations backed into a corner, you're going to have fewer people lashing out and doing crazy things because they feel protected. And so we want as fast a Bitcoin adoption as possible to minimize the economic pain of blow up. In a perfect world, we do a beautiful deleveraging, we reset the economic system, but people have some proportional amount of wealth in Bitcoin, and that papers over the failings of the fiat system, and people are relatively okay during the transition. Now, if we had collapse tomorrow, that means 80-90% of the world doesn't own any Bitcoin or gold. They'll be in bad shape. If that happens in 7 years, maybe we can get that 10-20% up to 30-40-50%, in which case we'll have a smoother transition. And so that's how I see the Bitcoin playing in the large variables. What does a first turning look like? Historically, it's a period of exhaustion. We're sick of fighting. Just finish it up, make a new institution. I want to go back to normal. I want to do boring stuff again. I'm sick of all the political drama. And these are defined by economic stability and economic equality. And so during the fourth turning, there will be winners and losers. And on the other side, we should expect a little bit less inequality. And what that actually means is not the bottom getting paid more. It means the people who have large amounts of money are going to get wrecked. I should say the ones positioned into bonds and dollars and real estate, they're going to disproportionately lose. Anyone with hard assets will disproportionately win. The net effect is some sort of a rebalancing because there's a new game and people will adopt that new game at different rates. And usually the largest asset holders are late to the change because they don't need to make a change, right? Large organizations struggle to disrupt themselves. Innovator's dilemma. Similar thing happens with allocators. That being said, Wall Street is very quickly waking up to this thing. And so I kind of expected them to fight it longer and more normal people to adopt it. But I think the age of cheap sats for retail is closing, and Wall Street is buying it up like crazy. And so, yeah, not ideal, but also if Bitcoin is the best monetary asset in history, which I do believe it is, we can't be surprised that Wall Street and nation states and anyone else you don't like is buying it because it's the right thing to do. And if you evaluate it, it's clear that it's the right thing to do. So no more crying that the banks are adopting it. Yeah, it doesn't make me happy, but this is what winning looks like. And we need to adapt to the reality on the ground instead of some 2012 cypherpunk world where we're disrupting the banks, blah, blah, blah. That was never a real future. It was an idealistic view that didn't take into account reality. That's my take on that.
Yeah, and it's pretty clear that us Bitcoiners and anybody who wants to come and join us, we will be the ones who are writing the next chapter of history. And so, yeah, Brandon, I think we can wrap it up here. That was an excellent 1-hour masterclass on the fourth turning and how Bitcoin is fourth turning money. If people wanted to find out more about you, your work, your writing, and what you do with Swan, where can they go?
Absolutely. So all my writings at brandonquittem.com. Find me on Twitter. That's the home base. B Quittem, B, and then my last name. DMs are open. Come say hello if you want to chat. I've been at Swan for 5.5 years. I oversee a large chunk of the org at this point. If you want to buy Bitcoin and you live in the US, you can go to swan.com and get started there. We also have mobile apps on whatever platform you like. We have an IRA product, so you can buy Bitcoin in your tax advantage accounts. We have a collaborative custody product called Swan Vault, a multi-sig for long-term storage. Otherwise, it's just a normal brokerage experience with all the financial services products that you would expect. And yeah, big things coming for Swan this year. Expect some big announcements, and very, very proud of what we built. And yeah, that's it for me.
Cheers, Brandon. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rob.